You don't have to be a shipwreck expert to recognize this bow. It's the bow of the most famous shipwreck in the world, the RMS Titanic. RMS Titanic was an Olympic-class passenger liner. She's infamous for her collision with an iceberg on April 14, 1912, and her dramatic sinking. She sank 1,000 miles due east of Boston, Massachusetts, and 375 miles southeast of St. John's, Newfoundland. Below are the massive anchor chains on the bow section of the deck. Titanic was the largest passenger steamship in the world at the time of her sinking. 882 feet 9 inches long. That's 269 meters. Titanic had a gross registered tonnage of 46,328 tons and a height from the waterline to the boat deck of 60 feet, or 18 meters. She contained 2 reciprocating 4-cylinder triple expansion inverted steam engines and 1 low-pressure Parsons turbine. These engines powered 3 propellers. Here we see a broken flange from part of the propeller shaft. The Titanic's 3 propellers were some of the largest ever built. Each blade was 16 feet in length. There were 25 double-ended and 4 single-ended Scotch-type boilers fired by 159 coal-burning furnaces that made possible a top speed of 23 knots, or about 43 kilometers per hour. Here we see a section of the boiler, almost completely covered in rusticles. Below us is the forward cargo boom, and below it, the hatchway into the forward hold. Here, ship's supplies were stored, along with the possessions of the passengers. She had a double-bottomed hull containing 44 tanks for boiler water and ballast to keep the ship safely balanced at sea. Titanic was divided into 16 compartments by doors held up in the open position by electromagnetic latches, and which could be closed by a switch on the ship's bridge. The ship was technologically advanced also. She had an extensive electrical subsystem with steam-powered generators and ship-wide electrical wiring feeding electric lights. She had 2 Marconi radio sets manned by operators who worked in shifts, allowing constant radio contact and the transmission of a large number of passenger messages. In view now is a winch head, still clearly marked Napier Brothers Engineering in Glasgow, Scotland. Here the port anchor is visible, fused to the bow by the rustical formations. Looking downward, we can see a bathtub in one of the upper cabins through a tear at the joint between ceiling and wall. During Titanic's maiden voyage from Southampton, England to New York, she struck an iceberg at 23:40 ship's time on Sunday, April 14th, 1912. She sank 2 hours and 40 minutes later at 02:20 on Monday, April 15th. Here is a telegraph, the instrument used to communicate with the engine room. Here on the starboard side of the hull, we see one of Titanic's electric winches. It stands next to an air vent. Titanic was the most luxurious ship ever built. She offered an onboard swimming pool, a gymnasium, a Turkish bath, libraries for each passenger class, a squash court, common rooms. Here we see the chandeliers in one of the first-class cabins. On her maiden and last voyage, the Titanic's first-class passenger list included some of the richest and most prominent people in the world. Among them were millionaire John Jacob Astor IV, industrialist Benjamin Guggenheim, Macy's department store owner Isidor Straus, Denver millionaire Margaret Molly Brown, Sir Cosmos Duff Gordon. Also on board was American silent film actress Dorothy Gibson, the White Star Line's managing director J. Bruce Ismay, who survived the sinking, and from the ship's builders, Thomas Andrews, who was on board to observe any problems and assess the general performance of the new ship. The very popular E.J. Smith was captain of the Titanic on her maiden voyage. This voyage was to be his last command before his retirement. Titanic could carry a total of 3,547 passengers and crew, and because she carried mail, her name was given the prefix RMS, Royal Mail Steamer. The Titanic carried 16 wooden lifeboats and 4 collapsible boats that could hold 1,178 people, less than half of Titanic's 3,547 full passenger list. This number of lifeboats was 17% more capacity than was required by law. There are several figures regarding the number of passengers and crew who were lost. The United States Senate investigation reported that 1,517 people perished in the accident, while the British investigation has the number at 1,490. Regardless, the disaster ranks as one of the worst peacetime maritime disasters in history, and by far the most infamous. Many people believed that the Titanic, if she was ever found, would be in near perfect condition because her depth would put her in an anaerobic state with no oxygen available. They didn't realize at the time that anaerobic bacteria would slowly dissolve the ship, creating these orange rusticles and destroying the ship's structure. The media frenzy about the Titanic's famous victims, the legends about what happened on board the ship, the resulting changes to maritime law, and the discovery of the wreck in 1985 by a team led by Robert Ballard and Jean-Louis Michel have made the Titanic the most famous shipwreck in the world. Sonar imaging allowed the first look at the real damage of the hull. The imaging revealed 6 narrow tears that resulted in the sinking, not a giant gash in the hull as most people believe. The 6 different wounds resulted in uneven flooding at a rate of 7 tons per second. Water rose in the ship's 4 compartments as the forward bulkheads of the boiler room number 5 collapsed. Flooding was still confined, but almost 31,000 tons of water had been taken on. Water spilled from boiler room 5 and began to spill into Water from boiler room 5 began to spill into boiler room number 4, driving the bow downward and greatly straining the midsection of the hull. Around 2 a.m., the steel structure of the ship began to tear apart. When Dr. Robert Ballard finally released the coordinates of Titanic's location, he recorded the stern section at 41 degrees, 43 minutes, 35 seconds north, 49 degrees, 56 minutes, 54 seconds west. This meant that Titanic's location on the bottom was actually 13.5 miles southeast of the position that she gave in her last distress call. The world was stunned in 1912 by the loss of the liner Titanic on her maiden voyage. Halifax, Nova Scotia, located on the eastern coast of Canada, has one of the most moving and intimate connections with the Titanic disaster. The city played a key role during the tragedy's aftermath, becoming the final resting place for many of her unclaimed victims. 3 Halifax ships were involved in the grim task of recovering victims, many of whom were laid to rest in 3 of our city's cemeteries. Rows of black granite headstones, each inscribed with the same date, April 15, 1912, are a stark reminder of the tragedy.